Good afternoon. My name is MattPapach, and I'm going to talk about industrial organizational psychology. I'm going to do this by answering 5 questions. Take a few minutes and we'll go through each of those in detail. So let's get to it. The first question is, how have recent historical events affected the course of research in organizational psychology? I think one of the major influences in recent history has been the technological advances of the last few years. They've had a tremendous effect on industrial organizational research. This research has analyzed the benefits of instant electronic communication and productivity, almost to the point where, well, including the point where instant and 24/7 access to employees has been increasing burnout, and finding ways to find that balance when you have that instant access to all employees at all times. Technology can benefit certain areas, including it can affect the amount of selection bias in web chat interviews. Rather than somebody sitting face to face and certain biases being present during that interview, interviews can be done online where you have a little bit more anonymity, or you're judging candidates based off of their accomplishments and the way they speak rather than some other physical characteristics. Web chats can also decrease what Irving Janis called groupthink, where people get together in a meeting and they tend to seek concurrence over accurate information. People get together and they often make ill-advised decisions because they're just rushing to find an agreement. Certain technological advances can help that by reducing the interpersonal effects and having indirect or even anonymous contributions to problem solving. I think one of the most interesting advancements has been cell phone use in the workplace. It's one of the most recent significant introductions to the workplace. Thornton, Fairs, Robbins, and Rowland showed that for students completing simple computer tasks, merely the presence of a cell phone on the desk significantly decreased productivity. They completed this study in 2014, and at that time, 85% of Americans had a cell phone, with roughly 50% of them being smartphones. Pew Research indicates in 2017 that number has grown by 25%, with over 75% of people having smartphones and well over 95% of ages 18 to 40 having smartphones. So just having that extra connection can really affect workplace. The next question is describing the socialization process of the master's degree program and assessing its success in creating embeddedness. This is 100% online, my program, so there are some challenges and some different advantages and disadvantages to having that kind of production. So it's a little more complicated. However, following the outline of Chow, O'Leary, Kelly, Wolf, Klein, and Gardner, socialization involves the following 6 steps. I will provide an example of each and then give an assessment about its effectiveness. The first is history, for which in this program involves understanding the history of the college. I'm not too sure about the history of the program, but the history of the college, you can find a lot of information on the website, which you have to go through to access any of your online course material anyway. So you learn about the mission statement, Training Champions for Christ, and the massive growth that the university has experienced since 1975. So you do become familiar with those things as you traverse the online resources. It's not your typical private tour that you might like or you might gain at another university or a brick and mortar classroom situation, but there is information there if you are looking for it. The second entity is language. The language of the online classroom is very interesting. You definitely become familiar with things like Blackboard and discussion posts and learning how to get to the library and online resources. Even the encouragement to include biblical integration into assignments draws in some more of that language that you look for. Again, there are avenues to this information, but a lot of it is self-discovery. The third entity is politics. Politics could be how a student learns to communicate with professors, even other students, in the discussion board forums. And then also recognizing, certain things like the time needed to grade assignments. We would all like it to be instant, but we know that professors are busy and they have a lot going on. So, understanding when time is needed and other kind of communication needs is a lot of what the politics, I think, comes into play with the online program. Again, this is experience-based. You don't learn these things until you're in it. The fourth example is we talk about people. People involved in the online education program are obviously the other students and obviously the professor. Your interactions with them are important in building your relationship. I see on the discussion posts there are certain students who have been with me in every classes I've taken them. But they can also include other people, another range, information technology folks, bookstore folks, as well as other roles that are essential to student success. People make all the difference. I personally would not have gotten by if it weren't for the folks in information technology helping me set up my different programs and then getting access where I needed to. The fifth entity is organizational values and goals. Of course, attaining a degree not only meets the goals of the students, but also hopefully the goals of the university. The university wants to put out successful students, and it is a greater sense of embeddedness, especially when the individual's goals align with the organizational goal. When those people meet together and they're driving towards one thing, there's going to be a feeling of embeddedness and belonging. 6, performance proficiency. This is obviously graded through and measured extensively through grades and due dates. However, with online learning, there's a great deal of self-discipline that comes into play. In a classroom environment, it might be meet here at this time for the specific lecture and so on and so forth. The online has a little bit more flexibility, but with that comes its challenges. You do have to choose your time when you can sit down and when you can, knock out some dedicated time. And that takes a lot of discipline, especially for many students like myself who are, full-time, employed full-time and have familial responsibilities as well. Overall, the embeddedness with which Jackson Britt described as the degree to which an employee feels connected, they fit in, or feel that they are giving something up if they were to leave that program. I would say there's quite a bit of personal investment with students. On the flip side of having a employment contract, we are paying for the services of the university. But since we share a common classroom, there's still a sense of belonging that we would definitely lose if we did walk away. The next question is, how can an organization reduce or prevent work-family conflict? Work-family conflict arises when the responsibilities due to family or responsibilities due to work interfere with one another. Examples of this might be a sick child, or a parent receives a call from a sick child while at work and they need to do something about that. Some of these items are simply preventable, all of them are not. You really have to take into consideration where that balance is coming from and where those responsibilities do come into conflict. How an organization can reduce them or even prevent them can be difficult depending on the type of organization. Take for example direct care facilities where a nurse is taking care of patients. That's not something you can walk away from, as you might be able to do if you worked in another desk job or somebody can jump in and take your place. Or maybe those responsibilities can wait till the next day. But a wealth of information and a wealth of research has indicated 2 implementations that can significantly reduce conflict. The first is supervisor support for employee personal lives. So when an employee feels or they perceive that their supervisor is supportive, it decreases stress and allows for honest communication and problem solving. Dixon and Bruning point out that in a structural approach to addressing conflict, organizations can train supervisors in handling family conflict appropriately. And supervisors that receive this training generally promote more or less work-family conflict with their employees. The second thing organizations can do is promote schedule flexibility. This allows flexible schedules to decrease conflict as well. If you can choose when to work or be a little bit more flexible in when you work and how you work, maybe working from home certain days, obviously that can have direct impacts on the amount of conflict you will have. Implementing these things could involve or need to involve supervisor training as well as some structure to track work performance and time spent working, especially if you have employees working from home. Many supervisors probably wouldn't say, yeah, go ahead, work from home, and not really have any kind of follow-up or measures as to ensure that work is still being completed. The next question is, what techniques could I use to adequately evaluate employee performance as comprehensively as possible? Techniques to evaluate employee performance is pretty difficult because you draw in additional confounds like my own personal opinions of matters. If a supervisor is rating an employee or judging an employee's performance, you're also going to have to take into account how that supervisor feels about that employee, or maybe how that employee feels about that supervisor if it's a one-on-one interview or assessment. That being said, there are certain roles you can take to help diminish that, but there are certain confounds that will always be present. Any assessment of group or a group of assessments would have to examine both of Murphy's in-role performance and extra-role performance. In-role performance means any task that is associated with the job. So a groundskeeper and him shoveling snow or mowing the lawn. These are in-role performances. Extra-role performances are any interpersonal communication. So maybe what the groundskeeper talks to fellow employees about, whether on the job or in downtime. Out-of-work behaviors that can affect work, such as substance abuse. Maybe if the groundskeeper didn't get enough sleep, maybe he's pursuing an advanced degree and staying up all night studying. This can also include destructive or hazardous behaviors, another example of out-of-work behaviors. This is safety violations. If the groundskeeper didn't wear a seatbelt in the work truck, this could be an example of a destructive or hazardous behavior, safety violation that would also include extra role performance. So one way to measure all of this is to test on declarative job knowledge, whether by paper and pen or maybe interview, asking employees, what would you do in case of a fire? Or what's the first thing you need to do once you get in your work truck? Put on your seatbelt, right? Then you can assess procedural knowledge. You can test them by watching the employee carry out that task. Show me what you would do in this situation. A second way, which may be more useful and probably more popular, is utilizing rating scales, where you rate somebody, how well they do on certain things. And one important aspect of this is utilizing a behaviorally anchored rating scale. Now what that means is, instead of saying, rate this lawn being mowed on a scale of 1 to 10, and then you sit there and you look at, well, what's a 1, what's a 10, but you specifically behaviorally assign certain things to 1 through 10. So you would say that certain things like this meets a certain score. So for example, you might rate whether or not the grass is in the target height rate, or whether there were any missed patches in the lawn mowing process. And then you would be able to assign that to a number, which might give you a little bit more valid rating scale. It's very important that to use these types of tools of measurements, that the person who is using them is trained on them, that they understand, and you might even have to role play what behavior constitutes what score. The next question is, what are some of the possible common organizational constraints, and how can they lead to counterproductive behaviors? Organizational constraints are situational inhibitors of employee performance. They can include the budget, the supplies, the training and information that's provided, any equipment that the employee might need or think they need, anything that the organization could provide that could aid in the employee's performance. If those things are not provided, these would be considered a constraint on the employee. Pindeck and Spector in 2016 point out that when an employee feels ill-prepared for work, they don't have the things that they feel they need to survive or succeed, they will experience increased anxiety. And in fact, anxiety is the highest correlate to organizational constraint. When people feel pressured and they don't have the supplies to do what they need to do, they feel that a lot of anxiety. This is likely because the employee recognizes that a lack of materials and training will negatively affect their performance, and we all want to perform well. These emotional responses, such as anxiety, can trigger somatic symptoms like headaches, as well as attitudinal changes like increase in job dissatisfaction and commitment, and increase in turnover intentions. Decrease in commitment and increase in turnover intentions. These changes can lead to truly devastating results for an organization. Spector lists these types of counterproductive behaviors as production deviance, or attempts to work below capabilities, sabotage, deliberate attempts to undermine work, theft, an employee stealing from the organization, withdrawal, showing up late, leaving early, not attending meetings, or abuse towards others, disrespectful or even aggressive tones and actions. So it's very important that you monitor these things from an organizational perspective and do a lot of research and pay attention to the research that's out there, so an organization can avoid these issues, reduce these issues, and ultimately promote a more effective and efficient organizational culture. Well, thank you for watching, and have a great day.